All right, let's see. Clemson was about the best program in college football in 2018. And I got to say, Georgia is probably the best program in college football in 2024. And I believe the year is still 2024. So that points to a winner, but they will get on the field on Saturday and we will see how it shakes out. Welcome to our Clemson, Georgia preview right here at the Voice of College Football. We got two of the best from each side representing Clemson and Georgia here in one of the South's great rivalries, of course. Jason Priester's right next to me. You can catch him on Clemson Insider. And this guy down below is, of course, the incomparable Uncle Lou. Guys, how are we doing tonight?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Doing very well, man. Very well.
Thank you both for being here. And Lou, we'll size it up with you first and foremost. Before we get to what's going to happen in 2024 between these two teams, you know, you've got the rivalry with Florida, you got Tennessee, you got South Carolina to a lesser degree, and of course, Georgia Tech at the end of the year, which you guys pretty much just stomped them. Size up the vitriol with Clemson. How do you categorize this one? How much do you care about this one?
I mean, I care about it because Clemson has been a good program the last 15 years, but I'm 45 years old or 46 years old. Very few people my age or younger consider Georgia Clemson a rivalry on par with Florida, Auburn, or Georgia Tech. I know what happened in the 80s, but I was 5 years old when that was happening. And so, and so was everyone else my age and people younger. Now we play twice every 10 years. We're close to them geographically, but it's almost more of a, some people consider Georgia Tennessee a rivalry game. I'm a traditionalist. I think Georgia has three rivals: Florida, Georgia Tech, and Auburn. Clemson and Alabama aren't rivals, but they had a rivalry for a 6-7 year period. Clemson and Ohio State played, what was it, 3 times in 5 years or something in the postseason, and it became a mini rivalry within that sort of 5 or 6 year period. But like, no one really considers Clemson Ohio State a rivalry. So now older Georgia fans, yes, they put Clemson on par with Georgia Tech, maybe not Florida, but maybe with Georgia Tech, Auburn, Clemson, and then Florida kind of at the top. And it's not a disrespect thing to Clemson. It's people my age haven't watched Georgia and Clemson play every other year for our whole life. We've watched them play twice. They played twice in the 2000s, twice in the 2010s. This is the second time they've played this decade.
Well, hopefully somebody on offense can score this time around, because with JT Daniels and DJ out there, poor DJ, that was his first as starting quarterback at Clemson, and the guards and the tackles were in his lap every play.
Yeah.
That was the beginning of what we saw, that Georgia defense, of course, for the rest of the season. Jason, how would you take on that Georgia-Clemson rivalry in regards to what that means for you and for Clemson fans?
I'm a little older, so I remember when they played every year, and it was a bitter rivalry, back in the 80s. But Uncle Lou kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's just going to depend on who you ask, how old they are, and what they remember. He said it. They've played 5 times since 1995. This will be the 6th time, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're a little bit younger, you're not going to remember what they did in the 80s. You weren't around for it in the 70s, and you're not going to remember how bitter that thing was. They just don't play enough anymore. They just, the younger faction of the fan base, they just don't view Georgia that way, despite the fact that campuses are about 70 miles apart. It'd be nice if they played a little bit more often, but in this era, in this landscape, it's just not really feasible.
Now, hopefully people can find us. We're on the Georgia channel and the Clemson channel. I didn't want to cut off the live stream that we just did with Zach Smith on the main channel, but I've hyped this one up. But sometimes people have difficulty. I've got a few channels, Lou, so
I'm aware.
People have to redirect a little bit, but hopefully they can find us because this should be a fun one. All right. Yeah, looking at this matchup, Lou, do you have any concerns?
I mean, this is a total mismatch here. Since the last time these two teams played, both these teams have gone in opposite directions. Georgia hasn't lost a regular season game in 4 years. Clemson has lost more regular season games every single year since 2020, including 4 last year. All this I'm hearing about their wide receivers that were 5 stars and maybe they were hurt last year or maybe they didn't play and maybe Klubnik. It's way too many maybes to be playing Georgia in week 1. I don't. Georgia's got or Clemson's got a great defensive front. Okay, they're about to play the best offensive line they're going to play all year. That's at best, I think, a push for Clemson, but their secondary, I think, is an issue. Their offensive line is clearly an issue. The last time I saw Clemson play, Cade Klubnik got sacked 8 times against Kentucky. So people can make up their own mind about how Georgia's defense may stack up against that. They beat Kentucky 38-35. Cade Klubnik's turned the ball over in every single game he's ever played. And again, teams can improve from year to year. Players definitely can improve, and you see a leap year 1 to year 2 a lot of times. But it just seems like a lot of it seems like Clemson counting on a lot of I hope this happens, or this could happen, or this player could be that, or this position group could be that. That's too many ifs to be playing Georgia in week 1. I mean, I don't see any chance at all Clemson wins this game. I don't know how they'll score. I don't really know how they'll get first downs. I like Maffa, but Maffa playing behind Shipley as a complete and total change of pace is one thing. Him carrying the ball 20 times is another. I mean, so, he averaged more yards than Will Shipley is what I keep hearing from Clemson fans. Well, so did Quinshon Judkins back up at Ole Miss. He ran the ball 10 times less per game. I mean, Maffa's good, but who's behind him? Again, Clemson recruits well. They're talented, but it hasn't worked. Offensively, they've been a complete mess for 4 years. Where's Sammy Watkins? Where's DeAndre Hopkins? Where's T. Higgins? Where's Justin Ross? Where's a quarterback that can complete a pass? And look, I'm not expecting them to have another Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence. Those are once-in-a-lifetime QBs that they got back-to-back. I mean, it was unbelievable. But, I mean, I don't know anybody who's watched Cade Klubnik play and goes, boy, I don't know what we're going to do. He looks lost. He holds on to the ball too long. I don't know. I mean, Georgia's not perfect. The defensive line, can be had by an elite offensive line, which Clemson doesn't have. I mean, they don't have Alabama's offensive line. Georgia got pushed around in the SEC championship game by an NFL offensive line at Bama. Clemson doesn't have that. The running back situation is a little bit up in the air and kind of a mess at Georgia. But this ain't 2017 Georgia. I mean, Carson Beck's the best returning quarterback in college football. Threw for over 4,000 yards last year. He'll throw for that again. I don't see much of a path for Clemson in winning this game.
Do you take all that in, JP? Dabo needs some serious help from you. Can you scheme something up here?
This is going to be a good litmus test for where Clemson's at, heading into this season. They as a team that was one of the national powers there for 6-7 years, they've taken a major step back the past 3 years. 3 losses, 4 losses in the past 3 seasons. An offense that has been as discombobulated as almost any you've seen across the country. I think a lot of that's got to do with youth, injuries, installing a new scheme last year. There's a lot of blame to go around. I do think Dabo's done some things to address that bringing in Matt Luke. The only thing he didn't do was hit up the portal hard. He's hired a couple of new coaches to try to address some of the inexperience over there. But I'm not picking Clemson to win this game by any stretch. Make no mistake. But over the past few years, or going back to 2013, 2014, whenever, I've seen Clemson get punched in the mouth and get their doors blown off one time.
Duke.
I would very much be surprised if they got boat raced in this game.
As surprised as you were about Duke, or more surprised?
Yeah, I don't think they got boat raced by Duke, man. I think they went out there and played sloppy and underestimated their opponent. Didn't look ready. I don't think you got to worry about them being ready for Georgia. I think they'll be up for this one. The game they got punched in the mouth in was South Bend a couple of years ago when they went up there and got punked. But that's about the only time they've got punched in the mouth and just flat rolled over. You've only seen it one time in the past.
I like Matt Luke. He's a great hire. I mean, he was at Georgia, and we got extremely lucky. We had Pittman before that, who I think's probably the best offensive line coach, and Matt Luke's right there with him. And so we sort of lost a great one and had another one waiting right there in Matt Luke, and he retired. I don't think we'll ever know the real story there. I don't know what went on there. Something happened. I don't know what it was. But anyway, I'm glad to see him back in football, and he's a great offensive line coach. I mean, Garrett Riley's a great offensive coordinator. Maybe we'll find that out in year 2. And with Matt Luke, I mean, the guy's not going to turn water into wine. I mean, he inherited 8 NFL offensive linemen when he became the offensive line coach at Georgia. I don't think Clemson has that. Maybe he'll beef up the offensive line over the next year or 2 through recruiting and development and things like that. But I'm not expecting Matt Luke to come in and be a miracle worker on that offensive line this year, just like Garrett Riley wasn't going to come in last year and put up 40 points a game like he did at TCU with Max Duggan. So
I'm with you. I don't expect Matt Luke to be a miracle worker. I do think Clemson's got some talent in that offensive line room to work with, or I think he's got some talent in that offensive line room to work with. I think they have vastly underperformed going back 4 years now. I think it's been a huge issue. It's not like there's no talent in that room. You got a bunch of 4 stars, I think a couple of former 5 stars. It's not like they're devoid of talent or anything. But no, I don't think he's a miracle worker. I don't expect that kind of jump in year 1. I think you probably see more improvement in year 2 than you would in year 1, just like we'll probably see more improvement with Garrett Riley's offense in year 2 as opposed to year 1. But for me, it all starts with quarterback, Cade Klubnik, right? This is a kid who, at the end of his sophomore season, he was nowhere near where a lot of people thought he was going to be, including myself. You watch what he did there at Westlake in high school, and he looks like he's just oozes that it factor, and he gets at the collegiate level, and he's just kind of like a deer in headlights. The game's just so fast for him. He looks like a different dude this year, so we'll see where he is. But it's going to take – I think for Clemson to pull off the upset Saturday night, man, it'll take an almost perfect, performance from those guys and Georgia making some mistakes that they don't routinely make.
Yeah. It sounds kind of cheesy because people kind of use it as a throwaway line whenever you're talking about an upset, and people say, well, you can't turn the ball over. But like in this case, I think because of the problems Clemson had last year, turning the ball over in every single game, like it is worth mentioning here without just sounding like you're regurgitating something you hear all the time. Clearly, they can't afford to turn the ball over here from a confidence standpoint too, coming off of last season. If they were to come out, first couple of drives and put the ball on the ground, or Cade Klubnik were to throw an interception, and that starts getting in his head, here we go again type of thing. We can't hold on to the ball. If that were to happen, I could see a situation where the game starts to steamroll or something like that. If they play a clean game, if they don't turn the ball over, if they are able to run the ball, keep the Georgia offense off the field, then maybe we end up with something similar to what we saw in 2021. I'd be shocked if there's no offensive touchdowns again. I mean, the odds of there not being an offensive touchdown in any college football game in today's world is astronomical. So there's no way I would bet on that. But, some points will be scored. But, maybe they find a way to keep it close if they can run the ball and of course, not turn it over. And like you said, maybe Georgia makes some mistakes. Georgia had some turnover problems last year, too, and didn't force a lot either. And they didn't really get to the quarterback that much last year. Kirby's got this thing. I get so mad about this whole affecting the quarterback thing that coaches say. I get so mad We affected Jalen Milroe every time he dropped back to throw in the SEC championship game. And guess what he did? Ran out of the pocket and threw the ball downfield or took off running for a first down. The only effect I want to see, I hate to use the expression here, Mark, but I'm going to do it anyway. You know what you get when you have me on. But the only effect I want is to see the quarterback's dick in the dirt, because then he can't run for a first down. He can't throw a completion. He can't do any. This idea that, well, sacks don't matter. Sacks are over. The only time Kirby says that is when we're struggling to get them. That's it. A couple of years ago when we were leading the league in sacks, that's all he wanted to talk about. So sack the guy when you get back there. Not that I think Cade Klubnik's going to, run for 200 yards in this game, but I'm just, you got to be able to get to him. And I think Georgia will, by the way. I think they will get to Cade Klubnik in this game a lot. Back to Georgia's running game. Do you think Etienne's going to play, Mark? I don't think he's going to play.
I don't think he's going to play. No,
I don't think he's going to play either.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to play either. I don't think he should either. And I'll tell you the worst. I tell you what I absolutely don't want is for him to play and then sit out next week. That I don't believe in that. The cherry picking thing. If somebody deserves to be suspended, and that's a decision for Kirby and the athletic department to make, but if somebody deserves to be suspended, they deserve to be suspended for the next game they play. Not cherry picking a high school team 2 weeks later. I'm in no position. Everybody knows I'm not casting stones on Etienne at all. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody's entitled to second chances or third chances or whatever else.
Yep.
But you're not entitled to those chances without consequences. I've had consequences for every mistake I've ever made, no matter how little or big. An appropriate consequence has come along with that every single time. And yes, the DUI got dropped, but that's very common in DUI cases, especially a first DUI. So it's not a thing where like the cops, the cops were wrong. He wasn't DUI. He probably was. And through a negotiated settlement, they've dropped the DUI in exchange for him pleading guilty to the reckless driving and minor in possession of alcohol. So there needs to be, I think, a punishment for that. And I'm willing to even admit that this might not sound fair, because I do believe in treating each individual case on its own merit, but you can't ignore the overarching issues, driving related issues, at Georgia as it relates to these cases.
I'm glad you got to that.
Right. I mean, is it Etienne's fault that someone else was speeding or reckless driving or racing? No, of course not. That's each individual's fault that does that. But as a team, it's too much going on. And so it's something I think Kirby has screwed up by not just coming out and saying it. Like it's caused the story to drag on, I think. He could have told us a month ago, Etienne's going to be out for the Clemson game. Like, I've talked to him. He understands what he did wrong. We love him. He's with the team. He's practicing. He's going to be back in week 2, but he's got to miss the first game. This, everything's a nuclear secret with Kirby. You know what I mean? And he just, I think he could have done himself a favor by just coming out, if he's not going to play, and saying that. Because now everybody's talking about, is he going to play? Is he not going to play? And it's just constantly bringing back into the news cycle the idea of Georgia and the off-field problems that they've had.
And so, the most overused phrase in college football is culture. Everybody talks about culture, and I have a pretty good read on what that is. Now with Georgia, the culture, aside from guys getting in vehicles, seems to be sound and seems to be fine. The guys seem to go to class, do whatever they need to do, don't do anything egregious against the law otherwise, and everything seems to be fine. But I have never seen such an odd situation of just time after time after time after time, especially when the most publicized one and the first one that I recall actually was so severe and deaths resulted from it. You would have thought, okay, we're laying down the hammer and this is going to change. But it's the strangest issue I've ever seen haunt a football program.
I don't want to turn the whole show into this, because I know we're supposed to be talking about the Georgia Clemson game. So I'll just wrap it up with this. But, you have 2 people killed. And then since then, 25 arrests for driving related offenses. So what do you do? Okay. All right. Well, Kirby comes out and says, well, we're fining them through NIL, and we've been fining them through NIL for a year. Well, I say, well, then that's not working. And Georgia fans are they probably get mad at me now. I've been dealing with this for a few months because I haven't changed my mind about how I feel about it. But like, if you're running the same play on 3rd and 2 over and over and over again, and it never works, what do you do the next time it's 3rd and 2? If the coordinator is going to keep running the same play, you got to get rid of him. Whatever he's been doing, we bring these speakers in and we've talked to the team this number of times and we find this number of players. Okay. My question is it working? Because in the last 30 days, this is still going on. You've got people arrested in the last 45 days. So, okay, you've tried things. It's not working. You got to try something else. And then, they say, well, what do you want them to fire Kirby Smart? No, that's the last thing I want, which is why something's got to change. Because I'm going to tell you, right, I don't care how many games Kirby Smart wins. If in the next 18 months, there's 25 more arrests and 2 more dead bodies, Kirby will not be the coach in 19 months. And nobody, I don't want that. I want Kirby here in 10 years from now. So something's got to change. And they say, well, you sound like you got all the answers. I don't make $12 million a year to run that football team. I don't have to have the answer. That's not my job. That's Kirby's job. And I appreciate the things that he has tried to do. But again, I would ask, are they working?
And being a good leader of young men, if he's incapable of handling that type of issue, there's nothing wrong with knowing as a leader that you can't be great at everything. And this is kind of goes outside the realm of being a college football coach, that you go bring in the experts that can help you lead and navigate a situation like this to get you to where you need to be.
Yeah, that's been a problem there. I don't follow Georgia closely enough to know, what kind of things he does behind the scenes to maybe, impose some consequences on those things. Maybe they handle it internally or whatever. But when you're talking about this many, man, it becomes a perception problem. And I kind of agree with Lou. If you just come out and say, if you're not planning to play ETN and you just come out and say it 2 months ago, it's probably not getting talked about.
Dead story. It's a dead story at that point. You get maybe a couple of days of stories where maybe some people go, oh, that's not enough of a punishment. And then you'll have some other people that go, oh, that's too harsh. But then 3 days later, no one's talking about it anymore. They're talking about Branson Robinson and Nate Frazier and the running backs that are going to play instead of ETN. Instead, every single press conference last week and this week leading up to the game, he's asked about it every single day. Every day he's got the same answer. Pete Thamel puts an article out on ESPN saying, well, according to Georgia policy, ETN will sit out this, blah, blah, blah. Pete Thamel doesn't know. Nobody knows that. And that's the problem. And Kirby is like this with everything. He won't release a depth chart. There's no injury reports. Every player that's ever been injured at Georgia is this close to coming back tomorrow.
Hey, that's Dabo too now. Everybody's day to day.
Drives me up the wall.
Unless they're out for the year now, everybody's day to day.
Yeah. That drives me up the wall. NFL doesn't get everything right, but there's a few things they get. You're not allowed to play those games in the NFL. You're not allowed to do. If a guy's hurt, he's out for this many days, and he's on this list or the IR list or the inactive list or whatever it is. And if someone is suspended, that's bargained in the agreement. Ahead of time this player is out and that. But with Kirby, everything's a government secret. I can understand. Let's say you lose a quarterback. You got a quarterback battle going on all spring and into fall camp. Okay. Don't announce the starting quarterback. That way you're not giving your week 1 opponent maybe something like that. But when it comes to injuries or suspensions or whatever, at the end of the day, this is college football. The line on this game is not going to move one single point, whether ETN is playing or not. So the idea that we're gaining some kind of an advantage over Clemson by them not knowing whether ETN's carrying the ball or Branson Robinson, I think is just crazy.
Well, it's been a long-standing approach to college football coaching that they coach paranoid, that if you're going to be a great college football coach, you're paranoid about everything.
Yeah.
Clemson puts out a depth chart every Monday ahead of a game. This Monday, nada. Because Georgia doesn't put out one, Clemson's not going to put out one. It's just, to me, gamesmanship that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it gets frustrating.
So if we're going to hit the chink in the armor for the Georgia program, then we got to hit the chink in the armor, or is a gaping gash in the armor of Clemson football that everyone talks about these days, and that's transfer portal. Why doesn't Dabo use the transfer portal? Now, Lou, Jason, and I get together about every week, and I've given Jason a few weeks off here, but I'm going to rope him back into our weekly discussion to talk Clemson now that we're into the season. And we've been a little light on the transfer portal because it's my thought, okay, this guy's an all-time great, and the program hasn't collapsed. And as Jason has correctly pointed out, their transfer losses have been minimal, and those losses have been much more minimal when you consider the quality of the player. They just haven't lost that much as well. So that's got to be considered. But at the same time, is this not truly the correlation of NFL free agency, where, yes, you build through the draft, but to be successful, you got to supplement your issues. And when your competitors, especially Florida State in 2024 or 2023 being the prime example of a team that stocked up and won a championship, at least in the ACC, on transfer players, that you got to think that Dabo's either going to, he's obviously drawn his line, and he's either going to stand on it here in 2024, and it's going to prove that he's ultimately right, or he's going to have to bend at some point.
Yeah, if you go back to the offseason, you saw Clemson try to target a small number of offensive line. I can't remember if it was 3 or 4. And one of those guys was actually Keelan Rutledge, who was fantastic for Georgia Tech against Florida State on Saturday.
Okay, yeah.
And that's part of why he ended up at Georgia Tech, because Dabo's not going to promise anybody a starting spot, and he's not going to get into this bidding war for you and stuff. I kind of like Kirby's approach to the portal. He doesn't lean on it heavily, but if he sees a hole he needs to plug, he goes and gets a guy. That would be my preference if we're talking about Dabo and his portal strategy. I think they need to be a little more aggressive than they have been. You can't recruit the portal the same way you do high school guys. You got Clemson's recruiting process moves at a snail's pace. And when you do that with portal guys, man, they're committed for you can even get them on campus for a visit. I do think it's an approach that's got to be tweaked. I don't think he's got to rely heavily on it. If you go back over the last few years since the advent of the board, there's really only one starter they lost, which was Andrew Makuba. They almost lost him the year before last. But if you want to throw Bo Collins in there, you can. I'm not sure he was going to be starting this year, but at the very least, his snaps were going to go down dramatically. But even when you're losing backup guys and you're losing, redshirt freshmen and sophomores routinely to the portal, even if they're depth guys, and you're replacing them with high school guys, you're always going to stay young and inexperienced. You're not developing at the same pace you used to develop. I would like to see Dabo at least, I'll use defensive end as an example. That was a spot most people thought Clemson needed to bring in a guy from the portal, kind of bridge a gap. Not a lot of experience behind TJ Parker, and he's only going to be a sophomore. Instead, they choose to move Peter Woods outside. I think Clemson's got a lot of depth, on the interior. They can afford to move Peter Woods outside, and I think he'll probably play pretty well there. We saw Christian Wilkins do the same thing for that Clemson a few years ago. But is that where Peter Woods would be at his best? Outside as opposed to inside? I'm not sure it is, but end was a spot that a lot of people thought Dabo should have looked at it in the portal, and they just, instead of doing that, they move Woods outside.
With all due respect, whether you're losing a starter or not is irrelevant when there are players in the portal that are better than your current starters. Dabo is putting himself at a competitive disadvantage compared to everyone else in college football. it becomes even worse when you realize that while Clemson recruits good out of high school, they do not recruit great or elite. They're a 10 to 15 recruiting team. You look at the teams that recruit in the top 5, Georgia, Bama, Ohio State, Michigan, whatever you want to name. They're out recruiting Clemson by a country mile out of high school, and then they're adding 2 or 3 elite players a year with experience to their roster through the portal that are immediate starters. So this idea that, well, we're not losing starters, so maybe we don't need anybody from the portal is a little bit silly, especially when you don't have a wide receiver that anybody can name. Your offensive line gets abused by everybody you play, and you've had 2 quarterbacks in a row that can't hit the broadside of a barn. If you put Keon Coleman and Devin Leary on Clemson last year, they win the ACC. It's not even close.
You're talking about something that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen.
Well, then Clemson's never going to matter.
Maybe not, but
you're not. It's just
never.
What if Dabo has some kind of principled stance against 105 scholarships that starts next year? And he says, no, we're not doing that. We're only going to have 85 scholarship players because, back in my day, well, we didn't do that. We didn't do things that way, so we're not going to do it. So everybody else has 105 scholarship players. Clemson has 85. You okay with that too? I mean, you cannot sit back and allow teams that are already better than you to get a competitive advantage over you by using the portal because your coach has his head stuck in the sand. The only thing to me worse than Dabo's dereliction of duty when it comes to the portal is fans, Clemson fans, who aren't screaming at the rooftop about Dabo driving a top 5 program into irrelevance by ignoring the portal. The portal's been around 4 years. Clemson has gotten worse every single year since the portal was invented. Is it possible that's a coincidence? I guess.
People can bitch and moan about it all they want. But he is
teams
not.
That were already better than Clemson are getting even more better through the portal while Clemson is standing still. They're getting lapped. And I'd be the most hated Georgia fan on the planet if Kirby Smart came out tomorrow and said, I'm not using the portal. We don't need it. I don't agree with it. It's against my principles. I would be yelling from every rooftop that he needs to get it together. This is insanity. He's never going to change on that.
He's not going to do it, man.
I'm glad you got to see him win 2 natties 10 years ago because it ain't happening again.
So, Jason, when you say he's never going to do it, obviously, if we're looking at the track record of 4 years, I can agree with you and say, yeah, if he hasn't budged yet, but he's got to be smarter than that. We know that the man is smarter than that. We know that football coaches are arrogant by nature and they're stubborn by nature. And when they've had the success that he has, I understand where that thinking comes to from a certain aspect. But we saw Nick Saban and we saw him change when he was very out front about, I don't want to change. I don't want to play this style of football. I don't think it's good football, but that's the way the game's evolving. And so I would be a fool not to change with it. Therefore, we're hiring Lane Kiffin and we're going to throw the football all over the lot. And you know that I admire Dabo Swinney for a lot of characteristics. But I just don't think that this is some kind of ethical or morality play. I don't think it has anything to do with being right or wrong ethically. It's the way the game's changed and the rules have changed.
When I say he's never going to do it, what I mean is he's never going to give up on a kid after a year or two and replace him with a guy from the portal. Let's say Cade Klubnik, for example, since he mentioned Devin Leary. Never going to happen. He's just not going to do it. It's a promise he makes to those kids and their families on the recruiting trail. And you know what? Since we're talking about the portal, you got to get into NIL stuff. I don't know that Clemson can get involved in those kind of bidding wars. I don't think they can afford to win them. I don't think they can afford to win them. And if they could win 1 or 2 here or there, then you start talking about losing the guys already on your roster. It's not like Clemson's got this big, huge, rich alumni base that some of these other schools have, man. They're having to walk a fine line with how they spend some of that NIL money. But people can like it or not like it, agree with it, not agree with it. Dabo Swinney's made it clear, man. You can agree with it or not agree with it. He wants to run a developmental program, and he's just not going to lean heavily on the portal to replace guys he recruited to come play for him.
Let me ask you this. You say he makes these promises to these recruits and their families. What promises is he making? That
he's not going to give their spot away to a guy in the portal.
But he'll give it away to a true freshman that he recruits the next year.
I'm just telling you, like what the way it is, man. I just say, people agree with it, disagree with it.
What happened to? I mean, what promises?
He got out on the field,
Kelly Bryant, and then he sat Kelly Bryant on his butt and put Trevor Lawrence in. Now that was the right move. You know why? Because Trevor Lawrence was better.
He didn't give his spot away to Trevor Lawrence.
Yes, he did.
Trevor Lawrence beat him out on the field.
Well, you can bring a transfer in and have an open competition, and if the transfer beats him out, he beats him out. If he doesn't, the other guy gets to start. I don't see the difference between a true.
I think I said a minute ago,
junior losing his starting job to a true freshman out of high school versus a sophomore out of the portal. I don't see the difference.
Staunch reminder here: my name's not Dabo Swinney. It is not my philosophy. I am not defending it. I'm just telling you what is.
Well.
I mean, it just is what it is. People, like I said, people can like it, they can hate it, agree with it, disagree with it, whatever, man. He's kind of dug in on it. I don't know that he's going to change.
I hope he doesn't. Because if he does, he'll go back to running an elite program again. Right now, that's one less hurdle for everybody else.
It doesn't matter to me one way or the other, you know.
Yeah.
I don't care anymore at this point. You know, it's just
dang.
Kind of is what it is.
That bad, huh?
Well,
it's not that. It's just ever since I started doing this for a living, man, it's just taking all the emotion out of it, man. I don't care whether they win or lose anymore. It is what it is.
That's something serious there.
I'm not much of a fan the way I used to be before I started doing it for a living. I don't know. I got a different perspective on it now, and it's just changed it for me emotionally, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I hope you're right.
That happens to a lot of people.
Not you, Mark. Mark, you're still way too emotional when it comes to Ohio State. You're way too emotional.
You've really seen that, have you?
You're way too
really.
Yeah, I remember it 10 years ago.
I don't flinch. What are you talking about?
10 years ago, Clemson lost a football game, man. I might not sleep for a day or two, man.
There you go.
You know, I don't know if it's because I gotten older, I started doing this for a living, or what. I just don't have any. I'm not tied emotionally to it anymore.
I still get really, really mad when Georgia loses and really upset and really bothered. I guess the only difference is now I make a lot more money.
And it might have had something to do with watching Clemson win a couple of national titles too. Something I didn't think was ever going to happen again in my lifetime. You know, I was a little kid when they won the first one, and something I never thought
mellowed me out. Yeah, that mellowed me out some too. Like losing to Alabama last year in the SEC championship game was rough, but it would have been a lot rougher had we not just won 2 national titles. So I, made it a little bit easier to stomach. So I get where you're coming from there. Yeah, I get where you're coming from there. Now, prior to that, because we kept taking these losses to Bama, like winning at halftime and lose the game, and it kept happening over and over. And I thought it was never going to end. But then, won a couple of them, and so I get where you're coming from there. That did make the loss last year a little. I mean, I still wish we would have won and made the playoffs and all that, but it wasn't as bad as say the loss in 2018 in the SEC title game.
Yeah, and the expectations have a lot to do with it. I know as an Ohio State fan that every time there's some kind of ranking that comes out, being number 3 on the list or number 4 or things that would get a Penn State fan or a Tennessee fan giddy doesn't sit right, because Ohio State fans want to be number 1 on every list. They want to be number 1 in recruiting. They want to be number 1 in national championships. They want to be number 1 in winning percentage. And when Alabama rules the world, that doesn't sit well, even if you could argue, well, we've been number 2. Or if Georgia's ruling, well, number 2's doesn't sit right.
Yeah, see, I think I can understand that coming from maybe Ohio State fans or Alabama fans. I mean, as a Georgia fan, Georgia's been really good for 7 or 8 years now. They've won 2 national titles. They're winning a bunch of games and all that. But I still don't go into a season thinking, well, if we don't win the national title, we're just terrible. And I sort of understand that from an Alabama perspective, especially Alabama fans who sort of, depending on their age, maybe they sort of came into their fanhood with the rise of Nick Saban, I mean, all they've seen is Bama just win. So, they go 10-2 and missed the playoffs a couple of years ago, and the sky is falling. I still don't feel that way as a Georgia fan. Like I enjoyed last season. I wish it wouldn't have ended, but like I wasn't, okay, well, we weren't quite good enough last year.
Yeah, there's a lot of Clemson fans. After those 2016 and 2018 seasons, they expected to win a national title every year. And, it's just, that's not going to happen anywhere.
Point. Yeah. And I'm kind of glad I haven't gotten to that. And honestly, I don't think Georgia fans really deserve to be at that. Like, I get it. Like, Alabama and Ohio State have been dominant multiple decades, going back a long time and stuff like that. Georgia's been a good program in most decades. Maybe you throw out the 90s. Most of the 90s. But, they're not on like an Alabama or an Ohio State. I don't want, the whole kind of a blue blood discussion. I don't think Georgia's a blue blood. I think they're the first team that's not kind of on that list. But so I don't go into a season, no matter how good I think Georgia's going to be, thinking, well, if we don't go 100-0 and win the national title, it's a complete waste of a season. I don't necessarily think that.
Do we want to take on this blue blood conversation? I'm sorry, Jason, go ahead.
Expecting to go in a season, going into the season and expecting to win every game all the way through to the national title. That seems like it would take some of the fun out of.
Right. And there's only one possible outcome that you can come away happy from. Like you're just, 99 times out of 100, you're going to be miserable at the end of the year if you're a national title or bust kind of mentality. Again, understanding why Alabama fans, especially over the last 10 years, have kind of felt that way because they were there or winning it almost every single year. So I sort of get it on their end, but
and because of what Saban pulled off, probably, I don't even know if happy would describe it. It would just be kind of satisfied. Like, okay, we accomplished what we're supposed to do. That's what we're supposed to do.
Right. Content. Like the sun rising, the sun came up again today. Go figure. We won another national title.
But you brought up the blue blood conversation, Lou, and I believe you tackled this recently. Now, I didn't see what your outcome to all this was. Here's my take on this. Blue blood is a term that goes back to royalty. And therefore, if you're going to take it down to the nth degree, you would have to trace college football back to 1869 and figure out. But that's ridiculous because the Princetons and the Harvards, they don't exist anymore in major college football. So you have to take it to some reasonable origin in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, in that range. And I believe at some point I did hear your blue blood list, and we are dead spot on in terms of who we deem as blue bloods. I have never used the term blue blood. Now, certainly when people ask me about blue bloods, I'll have the conversation with them. But I'd rather judge programs on being elite or not elite.
Yeah.
Georgia is elite, no question. Clemson was elite. Now, sometime in the process of the last 4 years, I've determined that they've fallen from elite. I don't know exactly when that happened, but I believe we've seen it enough now, 2021, 22, 23 into 24, that they're no longer elite. Florida State was elite in the 80s and the 90s under Bobby Bowden. One big year is not going to prove to me that they're elite, especially what happened last Saturday. I don't think Florida State's elite. I think Ohio State is generally elite. I think they've been more consistently elite than anyone since like 1970. So that's how I typically term and approach that conversation, is just who's elite. And you can fall from being elite and you can ascend to elite. But blue blood, if you're truly taking the term blue blood from royalty, then you, in a sense, can never fall from being royalty. There are bums on the street that have royal blood. They've just squandered away or done whatever they've done to it. But they are technically royalty, but they don't live like it. And there are others who have been self-made men that have risen out of the ashes, but they will never be royalty technically because they're just self-made individuals.
Yeah, I look at the Blue Bloods as a museum piece, and it's never going to change. I don't care if Alabama loses the next 100 games they play.
Yes.
They're a blue blood. They always will be. Nebraska, Texas, Southern Cal, Notre Dame, Oklahoma. There's 8 of them in my mind. And they're a blue blood today. There'll be a blue blood tomorrow. There'll be a blue blood in 100 years if they never win another game. Oregon, on the other hand, Oregon could win 6 straight national titles. That won't make them a blue blood. I don't think in my mind, the list will never change. Blue blood is a history lesson of college football to me.
Yeah.
And I don't really understand why people I'm like you. I don't really mention it or talk about it until it gets brought up by someone else. And here's who this is who I usually hear talking about it. Nebraska, Texas over the last decade. I don't ever hear Alabama fans trying to convince people they're a blue blood because they're good now. Nebraska wants you to know they're a blue blood because they've been terrible for 20 years. Texas, and they had a good year last year, but like prior to that, they wanted to walk around with their chest out and let everybody know they were a blue blood because they weren't doing anything today. But hey, don't forget though, we were really good then. We're a blue blood. Like Notre Dame. Notre Dame hasn't done anything since 1992. Nothing. 0 accomplishments since 1992. But they won the Sugar Bowl, I think, in 1990. I'm giving them credit for that.
Yeah.
National title was whatever, 89 or whatever, but they won the Sugar Bowl or something in 92. Great. Okay. Yeah, we know. Yeah, you're a blue blood. Great. Rudy, Newt Rockne, all that. Yeah. But they want to let you know that because they're not good today. I don't hear Alabama talking about or trying to convince people they're a blue blood. I don't know. So I think it's an irrelevant argument, but in my mind, there's 8 blue bloods and that will never change.
Got anything on that, Jason?
No, hard to argue with that, man. I think 8's about right. And I agree. You don't really hear, the teams that are good today talking about how they're blue blood. It's the teams that used to be good that aren't anymore. He said Nebraska, Texas, whoever. But I kind of lean more towards what you were talking about earlier. To me, it's about whether you're elite right now or if you're not. And there's always that upper echelon of teams. And like you said, Clemson used to be in it, not so much anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it matters way more what you are now versus what you've been over the course of college football history. Now, maybe it's a separate conversation you can have to say, does it advantage you at all to be considered a blue blood? Does it provide recruiting advantages, for example, or does it provide monetary advantages or name brand recognition advantages or something? And maybe it does. But Oregon's one of the best programs in the country right now. No one considers them a blue blood. I promise you, Oregon doesn't care. They're going to go out and they're going to play this year and they're going to be really good, regardless whether or not anybody thinks they're a blue blood or not. It doesn't have anything to do really with what happens on the field now. It's more like some kind of weird talking point that people use, but I don't think it has much impact on what happens today.
Lou, let me hit you with this one because Michigan fans, many of them hate me for this, hopefully just in a sports way, but don't like this. Okay, I believe that the relevance of the games and the championships has increased through the ages for a number of reasons. I think the most notable recent, in historical terms, recent change to the game was obviously desegregation. So once became fully segregated around 1970, those games are more valid. When you've got 70% of the NFL is black, then there's a certain aspect of credibility to the games that are played when everyone can play. And also that if you take it through previous to 1970 and start to go back before 1940, 1930, 1920, I was looking at this a few months ago. Michigan, this is what I determined. So I go through the years and I review the standings and the rankings and the results to determine, okay, was this national championship awarded correctly? Or are there other teams that have claims that are just as much justified as the particular team that didn't necessarily win the national championship? They were awarded with the national championship. So I started all the way back to 1869. Now it's ridiculous that Rutgers claims a national championship in 1869. Do you know how many games were played in 1869? Two.
3, 2.
In the entire sport. There were 2
Yeah,
games played,
yeah.
and they claim a national championship.
Yeah.
And then, like, the next year, there were like 7 games played, and then like, now you got to go like 40 years before there's a legitimate college football season played.
Yeah.
I respect that LSU, Auburn, and Penn State, I found in the early 1900s, were given or awarded national championships by certain services, but they don't claim them. They say, you know what? It's not valid. They don't claim them. Do you know who claims their national championships? Michigan. They've got
Alabama.
4 national championships before the forward pass was legalized. How can you even claim a national championship when you were playing a completely different sport?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, Alabama claims national titles in years they finished 3rd in the SEC. I mean, so,
Sure.
you know, Minnesota, 3 national titles in a row, right? 11 different teams claimed national titles during that 3-year period. Not to take away from what Minnesota did. That was 3 great years. But, like, would that be the same as if Georgia would have won the national title last year for 3 in a row? No. So, yeah, I understand. I get what you're saying. And this is also why, and you probably get asked this all the time, too. Who's better? 2019 LSU or 1971 Alabama? I don't know, man. I have no idea. Honestly, probably 2019 LSU would probably beat anybody from the 70s by 100 points. They're bigger, faster, stronger. They throw the ball. I mean, they're way better today than they were 50 years ago. That doesn't take, that is, I'm not crapping on your 1971 Natty or whatever. You know, everybody was playing by the same rules kind of in 1971. So you were the best team then. Like, that's all that really matters. But just, you know, trying to compare things from different eras to get into your point, pre-segregation, post-segregation. It's impossible to do.
Here are the 2 points that I bring up from time to time that I think, if for reasonable people kind of put them in their place, that if you're having an argument between, let's say, an Ohio State fan and a Michigan fan, obviously the Ohio State fan is going to take all the metrics that stack up on their side, and that's what they're going to argue. And the Michigan fans will do the same for the Michigan side. If you talk to any reasonable person and say, if you switched histories, if you are not lying to me, and if you are not delusional, and you are answering honestly, you would take the other school's metrics and their statistics and their results from their history, and you would argue what they're arguing against you. You would honestly do that. You can't say that you wouldn't.
Of course. Yeah. And I think me and you have talked about this before, that one of the draws of college football versus almost any other sport is the amount of subjectivity that is involved in it. And there's really, you know, there's no way around it. There's 134 teams. They'll never play. They can't all play each other. Even the Power Four, they can't all play each other. So this idea that, well, we don't know if this team is better as that team, or so you got people sitting in a room voting on the playoffs, and you got conferences with 18 teams in them, and they're not even playing half the league. It's so there's going to always be some of that. Like we argue now about national titles 50 years ago, right? Well, in 50 years, they're going to look at what we're doing now, and they're going to go, well, how did they know that last year Michigan was better than Georgia just because Georgia lost to Bama by 3 and Georgia didn't get in? Like, so there's always something you can, because you cannot, it's not the NFL. You know, it's not, you know, this conference and this conference, same number of teams, 3 divisions in each. This amount of teams make the playoffs from this league. This amount make it from this league. We play it down to it. College football is never going to be that. It would be impossible to expand the playoffs to an amount to give us that. And I don't think anybody really wants that. And for people that do what we do, like, that's a good thing. There's always something to argue about because of the subjectivity involved in college football, and there's really no way to get rid of it. And does it frustrate me sometimes? Yeah, I get mad when Georgia's 5th in that final playoff ranking, which, you know, happened a couple of times. I'm like, damn, yeah. But, you know, it's part of what separates this sport from the rest of them. And it's weird because we complain about a lot of those things, but a lot of those things are what makes college football as exciting as it is. I think that there's a lot of arguments that have no clear-cut answer. So people can literally argue the same point year after year after year after year after year and never be proven right or wrong.
I've got one more point to make in this conversation, and then I've got a question for Jason, and I got a question for you, Lou, concerning the Georgia-Clemson matchup, and then you guys can take it from there. This is what, to me, again, depicts the level of bias. And I tell people this all the time. I tell callers this. It's okay. You're biased. You don't have to try to argue that you're not biased. That's okay. You're a fan. It's allowed. It's okay. I'm not criticizing you. You're biased. I'm biased too. We have blood flowing through our veins. I'm biased as well. I try to eliminate that as much as possible, but I don't pretend to say I'm completely unbiased. I have filtered every amount of bias out of me. No, I haven't. I do my best to do that. But another argument that comes up that I think is just classic in displaying how biased fans are is, for example, 1997, Michigan and Nebraska split a national championship. So it's my job, in regards to how I approach this, to analyze the two seasons and to basically say, this is how valid I believe that this is for each team. And because they both played major conference schedules, very difficult schedules, and performed reasonably the same, I'm not going to name either one of them a national champion. I think it's too bad that they didn't play. So they both earned a national championship. So I can give you some kind of an opinion on who would have won a game, but I don't even try to go to that length. I just basically say, I don't know who would have won the game. These people, I think, are completely moronic to say, I know that Michigan would have won that game, or I know Nebraska would have won that game. And we've had debates on that very topic. And do you think I've ever had one Michigan fan say, you know what? I really think Nebraska was better. I think they would have won the game. And do you think we've ever had one Nebraska fan say, you know what? That Michigan team is really good. I think they would have won that game. No, every Michigan fan guarantees that they would have won the game. Every Nebraska fan, we would have won the game.
Yeah. And then they end their argument by going, and it ain't close. That's a dead giveaway that it is very close. When someone ends their point by going, and it ain't even close, that's a pretty good indication that it's very close.
All right, Jason, my last question for you. Paint the scene of a Clemson upset.
I kind of touched on it earlier. Clemson's going to have to be about near perfect. They're going to have to be able to, have some success running the ball. I'm a big believer in Phil Maffa, but this is going to be one of the best. This is going to be the best defense Clemson sees by far all year. And I still think that offensive line's a work in progress. I just don't know how much success they're going to be able to have running the football, which means they'll have to throw it around some. And I don't know that anybody's that confident in Klubnik and those receivers being able to do that, even though I think they're going to be a little bit better this year. I don't know that they're that much better. But for Clemson to win, Klubnik's going to have to, protect the football, make good decisions, not turn it over. He's going to have to make some plays with his legs and be a factor in the running game. Clemson's defense is going to have to be stout, and they're going to have to force multiple turnovers. I think that's Clemson's only path here. They're going to have to play about perfect and get some help from Georgia.
This underlines it right here. And we love Moose. He's here all the time. Moose is awesome, supports the channel. But again, sticking to his guns. Voting wasn't close. Like, those AP writers know everything. They're omniscient. They are all knowing. So their vote is perfect. 51-14 Michigan, 34-32. Coaches went Nebraska. We all know Osborne got a retirement gift. Nebraska fans would tell you Michigan slipped by a pretty marginal Washington State team in the Rose Bowl by less than one score. And Nebraska annihilated a Peyton Manning Tennessee team that was one of the top 3 teams in the country in the bowl game. So we can fight for either side.
It's a lot easier to know that Michigan's been cheating for the last 2 years than it is to know who would have won this game between these two teams. That I can tell you.
Yes, you can. And that is justified. This is what I will ask you. Uncle Lou. I will ask you about Carson Beck, and certainly you can add anything to this game or any other matchup or regarding the Georgia season. When I look at the rankings of quarterbacks, I'm pretty impressed with how deep it is. Like I go down like 30 spots and think that guy's a pretty good quarterback. But at the elite level, if Carson Beck is the best quarterback and nobody confronts this in any way, everybody believes Carson Beck's the best quarterback in college football. He just doesn't strike me as C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson caliber.
Yeah. I kind of agree with that. He's not a very well. Some of it might be personality. He hardly has one, which I don't actually mind that. He's very quiet. He's reserved. He's not sort of out there like some of the other sort of maybe superstar players are. And he's not, he doesn't run around. So he doesn't get that kind of attention that some of the other players get either. I mean, he's a traditional pocket passer. I mean, you don't see that much anymore. It's becoming a dinosaur in college football. But, can he run for 5 yards on 3rd and 4 if the protection breaks down? Yeah, I've seen him do that a couple of times. But he's not showing up on SportsCenter with a 60-yard touchdown run. That's not going to happen. He's got an NFL arm, and he's really good. He's really good in the pocket. And look, I'll be honest. It's still hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that anybody is even talking about a Georgia quarterback as being anything close to the top of the college football. Jake Fromm wasn't that long ago. And do you remember how much Georgia fans hyped him up? He never threw for 2,900 yards. Never in a season. 2,900. People throw for that in 6 games. So we've come from that to Carson Beck over 4,000 yards. I still can't believe it. When I thought I'd never see Georgia throw the ball around like they've done the last few years. I don't know if he's the best quarterback in college football. I see all the same lists and rankings that everybody else sees, and he's going to be drafted here or there. That's even a crapshoot. You don't know which teams are getting. Who's getting the first pick versus the 2nd or 3rd pick, and who wants a guy that can run around versus who might want more of a pocket passer. So I don't really know about all that, and honestly, I don't really care about all that. I'm so excited that Georgia has a quarterback that we can call a passing play on 3rd and 8. Like, I'm still happy about just that. Because for a long time, we couldn't do that. It was a draw. It was a hand. You better hope Todd Gurley's picking up 9 yards on 3rd and 8. I mean, that's just, Georgia doesn't have some kind of long history of great quarterbacks or really wide receivers for that.
That guy Stafford was pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, he was all right.
And Aaron Murray right after him.
And even Stafford really, Mark, some quarterbacks have great college careers and it doesn't translate to the NFL. And sometimes the opposite is true. Stafford has had a way better NFL career than college career.
True.
And you look at Stetson Bennett, the guy's a college legend. He'll probably never complete a pass in a real NFL game. There's a million other examples of that. Tim Tebow, not great in the NFL, one of the best all time in college. So being great at one doesn't necessarily mean you'll be great at the other. So I'm definitely not knocking Matt Stafford. He's probably the most talented quarterback to ever come through Georgia. And he's proven that in the NFL. Fastest guy ever to 40,000 yards in the NFL. It's now a Super Bowl win, most likely a Hall of Famer, I think, in the NFL. But it's still, Georgia's never had a 1,000-yard receiver. It's just a long list of things. Running back, So I'm still happy that Georgia's got what I would consider just to be a grown-up passing game at this point. So whether or not Carson Beck's the best quarterback in football or the best quarterback in the SEC or gets drafted number 1 overall or number 5 overall, I don't know. And I don't really care. I think Carson Beck is good enough for Georgia to win every game. In other words, I don't think he's what will prevent Georgia from getting where they want to go. There are bigger issues. And there's been a lot of years at Georgia where it was the quarterback. If Jake Fromm, every year Jake Fromm was there, for example, we were never going to win anything with Jake Fromm. The guy just wasn't going to happen. I think we can win with Carson Beck. Now, do we have the defensive line to hold up against somebody down the road? I don't know. We'll find that out, but I don't have any, in terms of Carson Beck's ability to play college football this year, I don't have any doubts at all. I think he'll have a great year.
Bigger issues. Is everyone banned from driving this season on that team?
Well, I will give them credit. They tend to stay out of trouble during the season, and that's the case at a lot of places. You rarely do you hear of any issues really anywhere during the season. They keep them busy enough during the season. This kind of stuff usually does happen in the off season. So, fingers crossed, who knows, but yeah, hopefully, yeah.
Jason, we so much appreciate you being here. It's the ClemsonInsider.com. I don't know if there's anything in particular there. Jason, you want to highlight?
Man, we got a bunch of Clemson, Georgia covers this week, man. Check us out, ClemsonInsider.com, man.
And when Clemson loses this game, if we had a camera inside Jason's house, we would see him throwing furniture and just going crazy. We learned that tonight.
I will actually be there. Hopefully. That's
Okay.
The plan anyway. I don't think I'm allowed to throw anything in the press box, man.
Lou, of course, you got your deal going right here on YouTube, as always.
Yeah, y'all check me out. Just search Uncle Lou, it'll come up. But I appreciate you having me on, Mark. I had a great time as usual.
Thank you.
Anytime, I'll do it anytime.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you both for answering the call. Appreciate that so much. You guys have a good night. Enjoy the game. And we will catch everyone back here. Let's see. Oh, we are just a few hours away. And Jason, I'll let you go. But thanks for being here so much. But yes. So the deal is that we are just a few hours away from the 24-hour live stream that starts at, what time is it? Good Lord, 10:08 Eastern time. I'm going to be back in this seat at 5 a.m. Eastern time. If it's 5:02, forgive me. If it's 5:09, forgive me. If it's 5:23, you can kind of lean on me then, maybe. But yeah, we're going to do our 24-hour live stream or something close to it, depending. But I'll be here at 5 in the morning. You can get here too. Come on, you can make it. We'll see you then.